Hello, everybody, and welcome to our NBA Trade Zone podcast, where we talk all things NBA trades, past, present, and future. Hi, guys. My name is Daniel.
And I am Sebastian, and today we are going to take a break from our preview of the upcoming NBA season, and we are actually going to discuss the newest news that Jimmy Butler has requested a trade away from the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we will take a look see some implications for the NBA, and see what are some options for Minnesota to explore in order to get back for Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, so we're going to be a lot more loose with our episode here, kind of just discussing banter back and forth. Jumping right into it, Jimmy Butler's situation seems like he didn't get along too well with Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns, kind of proven by the tweets that were tweeted out by Wiggins' brother. I think Nick is his name. So it seems like he just does not fit there. But my question to you right now is, do you think Minnesota should trade him now, or do you think they should wait closer to the trade deadline where more options might be available in terms of free agents who just signed with teams who can't be traded until either December 15th or January 15th?
I believe it depends on what offers are out there. If you give a good offer right now, I think it's a little bit too risky to take a gamble and wait till the end, because you don't even know what's going to happen. Jimmy Butler obviously last year was injured, right? You don't want to take a risk of him getting injured at the start of the year and him having absolutely no value. So I think if the right offer is out there, then you should take it. If you're another team, I think if you're going to trade for Jimmy Butler, you would want to trade for him now, get him at the start of the year, build team chemistry, and see where you can go from there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think some of the teams that could offer better packages, they weren't necessarily on Butler's list, but those are teams that might have better packages in December or January, such as the Boston Celtics, for example. Or perhaps Philadelphia could maybe offer J.J. Redick. But it's interesting. It's going to be, like you said, if they could get a good package for him now, it's probably better just to get it out of the way now, because who knows what's going to happen up until February, how happy Jimmy Butler is going to be there, and now how he would get along with Wiggins and Towns. And do you really want to upset Towns more at this point? Even though he's pretty much guaranteed to stay with Minnesota, because even though he's a restricted free agent next year, they'll match any offer given to him by a long shot. But now this might be the difference between him signing for 3 years with Minnesota or him signing with 5 years in Minnesota, and now you want him to sign for 5 years. So this probably is something that you want to take care of now. Probably fire Thibodeau. I don't know. What's your opinion about that? Do you fire Thibodeau after getting rid of Butler?
Yeah, of course. I don't think Tom Thibodeau is the right guy in that role, just because, this team is still very, they're still young. At least not counting Jimmy Butler now, who will assume that even if he plays, he's not going to be all into it. The two best players are young players in Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. And I don't know if Thibodeau's the right guy for this job. I actually would say he's the wrong guy for this job, that there's somebody else out there who you can get, who won't work them too hard, who will be a better way of getting these young players and shaping them for the future. One of the problems, though, is, Tom Thibodeau has been a general manager, and he has been bringing all his old players back. So now Luol Deng is signed with the team. Derrick Rose is still on the team. And then with Jimmy Butler gone, these players pretty much don't belong there. So that's the problem there. So, yeah, Minnesota's kind of in a tough place right now.
Well, yeah, they are. But first of all those guys are on one-year deals. And really, for Deng, it's a real good situation for him to get some playing time there, because they have almost no depth. They have a decent starting lineup right now, especially with Butler, obviously. But they don't have much depth at any position there. So having Luol Deng coming off the bench, and they had a couple roster spots open, so why not give a spot to Deng? Now, Deng might play more than 15 minutes a game, but that's probably more than he'll get anywhere else, and especially more than he was going to get with the Lakers. So having Gibson there, Gibson's going to start. No matter if Thibodeau's there and Butler's there, Gibson's going to start. Gibson's still a solid player. He's going to get his playing time. he might be unhappy that Thibodeau's gone, but it's not Gibson's team. Gibson's probably gone after this year unless Thibodeau stays. But I don't see Gibson sticking around there for longer than a year, and he is a free agent next year. So now Rose is Rose. I mean, Rose is going to bounce around the league and over the next 5 to 10 years on one-year deals most likely. I don't think any of those players really matter at this point, and especially matter in terms of making the decision about Thibodeau. But with Thibodeau, it's simple. He hasn't adjusted to the game. I mean, Steve Kerr, for example, in Golden State, is such a player's coach because he's a type of player who lets his team run his team, and he's just more of a mediator there. He's someone there who's willing to take the blame if something goes wrong. This is how we got to deal with modern teenagers and modern kids. And I mean, yeah, those guys Wiggins and Towns aren't teenagers anymore, but they're 2 years removed from being teenagers, and this is how we have to deal with them. That's why Kerr has been so successful as a coach in the league.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, especially with Tom Thibodeau being a general manager of the team as well, he doesn't, do you trust him to not screw up the Jimmy Butler deal, right? Like, if I'm Minnesota, in my opinion, I would want to get some young assets for Jimmy Butler just because the timeline of both Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns is not necessarily, I'm going to compete right now, okay? So I do think that you should fire Tom Thibodeau, bring in someone younger, maybe someone from like the Houston general manager, not the general manager, but the people who work for the general manager who have some experience from there. Bring them on, see what they can do with Jimmy Butler, see what they can do with this team, and prepare for some years in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be pretty simple. Most of the teams that Jimmy Butler wants to go to, or most of the teams that are good options for Jimmy Butler to go to, as we'll discuss shortly, have a lot of young players. So it is more than likely going to be a couple of young players he's traded for. Now, there are some young players who are better NBA players now than others. And it's just going to depend on how much the owner, Layden, has control over his team and how much Thibodeau has control, especially with this deal. But I think they're going to keep a very close eye on Thibodeau in terms of what type of players they receive back and whether there's a draft pick involved. Because if it was up to Thibodeau, he'd keep Butler up until free agency and take that risk of losing him even though he's as good as gone. So, moving on, I wanted to ask a quick question before we go into some proposals to another question here. What type of implications do you think this has for the Lakers, Celtics, and 76ers? Three teams who have a lot of good young players and have very bright futures, but for one reason or another, Jimmy Butler did not include those teams on the list, instead opting to go for three teams who probably will not even come close to making the playoffs this year.
I mean, when I first read the story that he reported the teams he wants to go to, the two New York teams or the Clippers, my first thought right away was like, those rumors about him and Kyrie teaming up there seems to be a little bit more, these rumors seem to make a little bit more sense, that these two players actually do want to play together. Now, for Boston, for example, this puts them in an interesting position because they do actually have the assets. Salary-wise, it might be difficult. You might have to wait until, for instance, Marcus Smart's contract is tradable. But, you do have to think about, well, do we trade Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart for Jimmy Butler, even though in the future that sounds like a pretty bad deal, but it would improve Boston's chances of being it would be better at least for the next 2 years.
Well, and here's my thing with that, okay? I was going to save it for a little later, but like you just brought up, if they're willing to wait till January or till December or January, I'm not sure when Marcus Smart can be traded by. I believe he's either December 15th or January 15th. They have different rules for each date. But I think they don't even have to include Jaylen Brown in this deal. Now, I think if you propose a trade package of Rozier, Smart, Marcus Morris, salaries match right there, and add in either Memphis first-round pick or Sacramento's first-round pick, one or the other. Is there another team that you think could throw a better offer than that at the Timberwolves? And or more too, is there another team who will be willing to throw more than that at the Timberwolves?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I didn't even think about that way. Better offer. I mean, the only other team that I think that might be able to throw a better offer would be, if Markel Fultz was included in the deal, because there's still potential for Markel Fultz. I don't know if that would actually be a better offer, but it might. It's the only offer that comes to my mind that would even be as good as that offer. Yeah, so that actually would make sense. And the Timberwolves, yeah, I mean they would be getting young assets. They would be getting something in return for Jimmy Butler. And I mean Boston, I think that's a no-brainer that you do it. You'd have either Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum coming off the bench, and I mean that would just be amazing.
Yeah, I mean they'd lose depth, and it'd be difficult. I still believe it'd be a difficult trade for the Celtics to make, just because now you got Marcus Smart locked up for 4 years, and he is the heart and soul of that team. Now he's definitely not by any means the best player on that team, but you'd be losing two starters. I mean, two starters on a lot of other teams in the league. Obviously, two players coming off the bench, and Marcus Morris, another solid player coming off the bench for the Celtics. You'd be losing a lot of depth. Not to mention, if you're trading for Jimmy Butler, you plan on keeping him. Now, you're assigning Kyrie Irving and Jimmy Butler to two more than likely max deals next offseason. You're putting yourself in a position where you are paying a huge luxury tax bill. Would the Celtics be willing to do that?
I mean, if I'm the Celtics, I think I would be willing to do it, just because, and especially in the playoffs, what we really need is you really need about 8 players in the playoffs, right? And what you're thinking, how can you compete with the Golden State Warriors? And I mean, it would be very hard to come up with better 6 to compete with the Warriors than the 6 that are there. And, you still have Aaron Baines, who performed pretty well in the playoffs last year. And you'd probably get one or two of those veteran guys that come up, kind of like the 76ers got with Bellinelli and Ilyasova. So there would be probably someone out there in February who you can pick up to fill out that roster.
Yeah, not only that, you'd probably be able to extract someone from Minnesota in that deal too. Probably extract maybe a Derrick Rose, perhaps a Tyus Jones to come back up at point guard, back up Irving at point guard. So it'd be very interesting to see. The only problem with that is I don't think the Timberwolves are going to wait. I think they will trade him before the season starts. But another implication for the Celtics that this may have is, like you mentioned before, I wanted to touch back on that point. You said the 3 teams he requested a trade to that he'd prefer to be traded to were the Clippers, Knicks, and the Nets. Now, the Knicks are in a little bit of a tougher position depending on who they could trade for Butler. If they could, for example, trade a Tim Hardaway Jr. and his contract in that deal, they're going to be much better off next offseason. But especially the Nets and the Clippers are in excellent position to clear 2 max salary contracts. I mean, the Nets would have to complete a trade of Allen Crabbe, which I think they'd probably be able to find a way if they had to. I mean, he's getting paid $18.5 million, but he is still 25 and making about 2.5 3-pointers a game. So I think there might be a team willing to take him on a 1-year contract if need be, and maybe the Nets might throw in a couple picks, second-round picks, whatever it takes. But them, and then the Clippers too. The Clippers have Gallinari, Montrezl Harrell, and Lou Williams signed beyond this season. However, I mean, Lou Williams is a good chance he'd be included in that trade if Minnesota makes a deal with the Clippers. And who knows who else would be included. I mean, there are just many possibilities. Hopefully Tobias Harris, obviously. I think Minnesota would definitely push for that. But beyond the fact, those are 2 teams that could really clear 2 max salary contracts beyond this season. And that's got to be at least a little bit more scary for the Celtics because of the fact that now those teams would be able to resign Jimmy Butler and chase after Kyrie Irving if need be.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why the Celtics would have to really look closely into going for Jimmy Butler, even in calling up Minnesota right now, be like, hey, if you guys wait, this is the offer we're going to leave for you guys on the table. Just because, you got Kyrie Irving and you got him for a really good deal, but you did give up some pieces in that deal. So you do want to keep Kyrie Irving, in my opinion. Now, I know I've heard some people say that, maybe you would rather see Kyrie Irving walk so you can pay a little bit more to Rozier.
That's stupid.
Clear up case. But I totally disagree with that. I think Kyrie Irving is a fantastic player, and he's young. He's proven that he's a winner. So Kyrie Irving, in my opinion, is the person to keep here. and try to go for Jimmy Butler if you can. If you're Boston, just because